Well, if we think about specific rights or the fights that we have done, they regard mostly the right to partnerships first, and then marriage equality. Then we have laws on non-discrimination and equality, which explicitly include equality on grounds of sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and sex characteristics. Then we have legislation which secures rights of parents and children in rainbow families, including adoption rights for same-sex couples. Then we have legislation which ensures the right to legal gender recognition for trans persons. I think those are the biggest, and they're divided into many different legislations. Well, I mean, in order to achieve marriage equality, or before that, the recognition of same-sex partnerships, that required years of work. My organization was established in 1974 in Finland. So it took at least 30, 40, almost 40 years to achieve marriage equality. And that has included changing people's minds. First, LGBTI people coming out and say that we exist in this society and we should have the same rights as everybody else. Then finding allies, other organizations, politicians who have been willing to advance legislation. And then in the end, I think first in Finland, registered partnership was achieved in 2001. After that, the society got used to the idea that we have same-sex couples who deserve similar rights, and then it took a while to achieve full marriage equality. Well, I think by the time that marriage equality was adopted, the society was very much ready for that. And I think the society was more ready than the parliamentarians. So, and that had to do with the fact that we had registered partnership already for about 10 years. So people had gotten used to the idea. And and in the end, the legislation was achieved through a public citizens' initiative. So I think in this way, the society was very much ready for it. But then if we think about the registered partnerships, that took a long time to get through. And I think at that time, there was much more questions in the society whether it should be allowed or not. But sometimes, and often, especially when you talk about minorities, you have to make the legislative decisions first, and then the attitudes follow. Well, there are some small groups in society that have different opinions. I mean, marriage equality, there were groups, religious groups, politicians who had religious convictions. There still are people who feel that it's not something that we should have, but it's a minority. I think some of those groups that were against marriage equality, they still are. They're still not. There was a group. We also had this kind of the Real Marriage organization, which was established, similar to Manif pour Tout in France and similar to in other places in the world. But I think by the time that marriage equality was adopted, there was so little opposition to it in the Finnish society that they didn't really have much influence. From the parliamentary parties, I think it was the Christian Democrats and the True Finns that were that most of the opposition was found from, and maybe some from the Center Party, and there were like single votes in other parties, but then there were a few parties where everybody voted for it. Well, it's about equality and non-discrimination. I mean, marriage equality just means the right to marry. It doesn't protect from discrimination. It doesn't protect from violence. So we need prides for both celebrating the diversity of people and to demand change in the society. Even in Finland, we have data on hate speech, hate crime against LGBTIQ people. There are big gaps in our legislation still if you think about trans people. For example, teenagers who are trans cannot change their gender legally, yet intersex children's bodily integrity is not protected. There are many issues that we are still fighting for. Well, since Seta was established in 1974, there has always been public demonstrations by LGBTIQ organizations in Finland. So basically the prides are a continuation from an annual public demonstration that was organized by Seta. It was called Vapautuspäivät in the earlier days, basically liberation days. And after that, there was Seta and its member organizations organized prides every year. And then eventually Helsinki, the organization in Helsinki decided to start organizing it every year because there was a need for it and people felt that there should be a big event in Helsinki every year. Well, I think I mentioned the rights of trans people, and last year our law for legal gender recognition was reformed in a way that trans people have an easier access to changing their gender, their legal gender, from male to female or female to male. And now the process is much more easier, and it's based on self-determination. You don't need a doctor's note, or you don't need to prove that you are infertile in order to get your legal gender recognized. That was a big improvement. But now we would like to have the same possibility for young people. So that also, because we know that if you are a trans teenager, for example, in school, if you have the wrong, the identity papers of the wrong gender, it's very tough for you to be in the school because the school might not respect your identity, and so we think it should be, minors should also have access to that. Then in Finland there is still the practice of when an intersex child is born, a doctor may determine the sex of the child without any consent from the child, as it's a baby. So we would like all those. We would like to ensure that the child's bodily integrity is respected, so that those kind of interventions, which are surgical or hormonal, they would have to wait until the child is old enough to tell what they want, because they can be very heavy violations of bodily integrity. We know that LGBTIQ people in Finland are heavily targeted by hate speech, and there are hate crimes committed against LGBTI people, and also there's harassment of organizations, LGBTI organizations or events, pride events. So I think there has to be more there have to be more steps taken to improve or to counter that kind of a hate speech and hate crimes. Then there's a whole range of issues having to do with school safety, access to healthcare, and so on. Our reform of the non-discrimination legislation has been really important because it obligates schools to ensure and promote non-discrimination and equality. And after that, the curricula for schools have been reformed in a way that they obligate schools to provide information on LGBTI issues. So it's obligatory.
When this reform was set?
2015. Yeah, but I think that is one of the big reforms in Finland, that we have a very good, relatively good non-discrimination and equality legislation, which covers almost all areas of life. So basically, in all areas of life, you have to make sure that there's no discrimination, and school is one of the important fields. It's part of our society now. I don't think there are any. It could be changed. I mean, obviously there are still forces that have different opinions, but they are a minority, and I don't think it is it would be a real issue. I mean, it's now over 10 years that we've had marriage equality, also strengthened adoption rights, and I think it's part of the society, and I mean, there are still issues, for example, within the Lutheran Church about it. And I think one of the reasons why it was accepted was that the decision about marriage equality, well, it is about civil law. It's about how the state treats you, what kind of rights you're given. But it left the Lutheran Church, still they basically can make their own decisions. Mm-hmm. So it didn't obligate the Lutheran Church to change their policy. But now we know that there are many people for example, priests in the church who think that it is only right that same-sex couples can also marry within the church. Priests in the church, they have the right to marry that right is granted by the state. So pretty much if a priest says that I want to marry people of the same sex, they are only living by the law. But there is no policy about this within the church. The church does not have a clear decision that this is something they endorse or this is the practice. They pretty much left it up to individual congregations that they can do whatever. And now we have a situation where there are many people who work in the church who are willing to marry people of the same sex, and even some congregations have said that yes, all of us who work here are willing to marry, and our churches can be used for same-sex weddings. Then there are churches where there are different decisions. It depends. I mean, if you think about globally, I think Finland is in that comparison, there are many good things have happened. But obviously, we still, as I said, we have incidents of hate crime, hate speech, and those make it unsafe for LGBT people sometimes as well. But there is still yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the situation. And of course, there can also depend on what kind of a community you live in. There might be different kind of communities which have different values from the rest of the society. So not all LGBTI persons in Finland can sort of enjoy the same rights, or they cannot access them because of there might not be acceptance for LGBTI people in that the smaller community. For example, it might be some very fundamentalist religious community. Yeah. So I think it's always hard to say. I think generally in the bigger cities it is a bit easier, but even there, if you live in a small community which has very tight norms, you might, even a big city, you might have difficulties. But then we do tend to hear from our member organizations from, for example, the eastern part of Finland or the northern part of Finland, that it might be a bit more to be visible as an LGBTI person there. But sometimes it can very much depend on your local community.